Hello world. Uh, yeah, I just missed my flight about 30 minutes ago. Nah, literally an hour ago. Um, and I'm waiting for the next one, which is gonna be at 11:05. Yeah, at 11. So there will be some time to ruminate and update you as to what happened since the last time I came on here. So remember, I started this by reflecting on the nature of January as a month based on the god Janus, and how the two-faced Roman god Janus was representative of the activities we find ourselves doing at this particular time of the year, even though conventionally it's not linked to how the ancients used to revere this month, but we find that people essentially reflect on the past and the future just like they used to when they paid homage to the god Janus, right? And after doing that, I met a community of people who worship marine entities. They're South African traditional healers, but of a particular pathway within the healing modality of South African traditional medicine. What made these people unique was that they don't do blood rituals. Like, we sometimes forget that even Christianity does blood rituals. The Lord's Supper is a blood ritual. The whole Old Testament is blood magic. And it's a very easy fact to forget because it's so embedded into our society or civilization. But blood magic is strange. So not really a fan. And part of the reason why I kept my distance from the South African traditional medicine community was I was only familiar with a single pathway within that paradigm. And these people definitely used blood. Like when you graduated, then the goat that they would slaughter, you would have to drink the blood of. And that for me was too weird. And I've seen people whose consciousnesses have been changed by the drinking of blood. There's a certain irreversible element. Like if I was to right now inhale some cannabinoids, then I know my consciousness will revert back to whatever state it initially was at. So if I start saying let's say at 70%, and then the cannabis experience takes me to 100, if I regress back, it'll return me back to 70%, right? But the people who've undergone these blood rituals, whatever change happens usually lasts forever for them. They can't reverse, they can't turn it back, which is why I've never been a fan of said. So this particular group of practitioners was interesting in the sense that they don't even want to kill the chickens they eat. That's how taboo blood is to them. As funny as that cognitive dissonance is, that they'll eat the chicken, but they don't want to be the ones killing it. That's fair. There must be butchers in every community, so I reckon they choose themselves not to be the butchers. Yeah, so I met these people around the 3rd of January, and I spent about 8 days with them. And in those 8 days, I saw amazing things, man. Amazing things. Like, I appreciate the fact that there is a reality within each and every person that is alive. And each and every person I interact with is a world on their own, right? But these people's realities it was like everything was this beautiful fractal, man. From like the moment I started interacting with the lady Mwakosetive, who pretty much ran the community. Not ran per se, everybody looked up to her, so to speak. She occupies a position of teacher / mentor to them. So when we met, okay, the dude who introduces me to this community, his name is Nkanyezi. No, not Nkanyezi, Nkazimulo, which means glory, right? So I talked to this guy one day and I tell him about my plans to save the world. And all he could say after hearing everything was that, dude, your plans are too broad. Please speak to my mentor about it. And I was like, okay, I'm familiar with people who are under the power of other people. I've met people who have mentors that they would ask literally everything for. So it's okay. I'll go meet your mentor. He said he's gonna come get me within about on the Sunday of that time when we had the first meeting. So we go to that Sunday, and when Sunday comes, he's supposed to come get me. He doesn't get me. And then a week later, after I was wondering, like when I was ruminating, contemplating by myself, I thought, like, did he not come to get me because I was not supposed to meet that lady? Or did he not come to get me because of his own reasons, like he had done something? So on this Sunday, I go to ShopRite, which is where the dude works. And just as I'm about to leave my skateboard at the parcel counter, I see him. So he pulls through, takes my things, he puts them behind, and then we're going to go and meet inside of the main shop so that he can actually tell me why he didn't come get me when he was supposed to come get me. Okay. Just as we meet, and I ask him, what happened? It turns out where we decided to stop is exactly where the person he was supposed to take me to meet is standing. She, for her own reasons, was also at the shop. I, for my own reasons, was at the shop. And then the lad works at the shop. And so we had our meeting, even though they were not aware. So it was pretty cool. That, like, they were not aware that it was going to happen. I wasn't aware also. I thought I was just going to get the answer as to why he didn't come get me. So we all leave the shop together, and the lad who works there takes a break, and we go to Makosetive's home. When we get to her home, I introduce myself. I attempt to tell her about, like, you know, the whole mission to save the world. I mean that literally, ne? I have a literal plan to save the world. It all has to do with the fact that my name is Peace Be Upon You, and it is my privilege to see the complete picture, because peace is completion, right? Peace is not some abstract state of mind that exists from away from this reality where there are no problems and everything is all blissful. That's not peace. That's the idea of peace I used to have before I delved into the Hebrew word shalom, because shalom, okay, so there's one level at which you can view the scriptures, and that's like the translated level. Then you can dive in a bit deeper and remember that these are translations and that versions exist, and then by diving deeper you pretty much consult your concordance. Your concordance is either going to link you to the Greek or to the Hebrew. And then if you look at the Hebrew, you're going to start to notice something very weird. The word shalom, for example, you'll find shalom meaning to make whole, shalom translated as peace, shalom translated as he paid back his loan, shalom translated as... So you'll find that this one word shalom has been translated several times as different several things depending on the context in which those three letters, Shin, Lamed, and Mem, showed up, right? And when you see this, you then realize that there are no static definitions for these words. Like the word changes meaning depending on the context. That gives it a dynamic nature, right? As opposed to you saying, "Thus saith the Lord," we translated it. No. Okay, translations, again, the issue again with translations is that they're not transcriptions, they're translations, which means the opinions and understanding of the translator will be reflected in the translation. A good example of this is, consider Jehovah El Shaddai, right? Yahweh El Shaddai or Jehovah El Shaddai, however you choose to pronounce it. When you look at the Hebrew for El Shaddai, El means mighty ones or mighty powers, right? And then Shaddai means, Shad means tits, and then Dai is just two tits. So El Shaddai, literally transcribed and not translated, means the mighty two tits, right? Now, picture a European trying to interpret this with their culture in mind. They read that Abraham heard from the mighty two tits how the mighty two tits was going to take Abraham to the promised land. And then, obviously, because they mention tits, you start to think females, right? And the Europeans definitely would have had a problem with God being portrayed in any suggestion as to a feminine aspect to any member of the Godhead would have been an issue. So the dude who translates and does not transcribe ends up translating Jehovah El Shaddai as Jehovah Almighty, the Lord Almighty. And that's not what El Shaddai means. El Shaddai means the mighty two tits, and the significance of that comes from the fact that an animal that has two tits, which was very popular in the Hebrew circles of that time, was a goat, because they were nomads, and goats are good for a nomadic people. They travel by themselves, they forage their own food, they take care of themselves. They make cheese which we can eat throughout the year. They make milk, which is the closest milk in terms of composition that's good for like humans. And then the skin of the goat was what they used for tents. And so the goat provided shelter, it provided nourishment. So those mighty two tits was God pretty much showing up to Abraham and saying, if you thought the goat was nourishment, dude, I am the mighty two tits. That's how he meant it. Now, the European, instead of explaining the context around this, decided, nope, it'll be simpler for me to just say God Almighty and simplify things. Now you've lost the beauty of an object lesson, and you've also trapped God into this patriarchal context. You must remember that we must of necessity anthropomorphize God. Like whatever formulation of God we have is an anthropomorphization. Thank you. Alaykum shalom. Thank you, brother. That was a gentleman who was sitting next to me. I found him reading, and I decided, instead of engaging him and asking about his scriptures, to just start pretty much broadcasting this episode. And I touched on all the topics which I knew he would have resonated with, just to see how he would respond. And he just projected peace at me. And it's a different energy of peace, because this kind of peace is okay, because his energy is Jewish. When he professes shalom, when he professes shalom, it feels different from when someone else professes shalom. It's a bit difficult to explain the nuances of intuiting energy from the tonalities of people. This is something we neurodivergent individuals tend to do a lot. So yeah, man, these people, I meet them. So the tangents were really for him, just to cover. I wasn't really sure if he was Jewish or if he was reading Jewish things, but I just got that energy, and I decided to touch on those topics, just in passing, to sort of coax him into conversation, if he was willing to be coaxed into conversation. I'm guessing so he left for his flight back to the recap. So I meet these. Okay, so we go to Makosetive's. So Makosetive, the title, ne? It means the Lord of the Nations. When I introduced myself to Nkazimulo, to Glory, the narrative I was sharing with him was so broad. In the middle of it, I found myself needing to reintroduce myself. And so I reintroduced myself to him as Begi Mihlaba, Polybius, the regarder of worlds. Similar to like Avalokiteshvara, but not emphasizing the listening aspect. So, Pegi Mihlaba is similar to Avalokiteshvara in the meaning, but it does not mean the one who hears more so than it means the one who observes the world, right? So I introduce myself as Pegi Mihlaba, and he says, no, Pegi Mihlaba, you have to meet Makosetive, the Lord of the Nations. And I'm like, okay, cool. So when we meet, the human vessel, the female lady, Zandile, so Zandile is the human lady who is the vessel of the entity Umakosetive, the Lord of the Nations. And so I meet the entity, right? The being, the human being. That's who I met at the store. The energy, when I looked at the aura, it looked royal, man. She had royal energy. Royal energy stands out in that it's bright and it glows, even though the light exuded is not necessarily sunlight, right? So she then we decide, yeah, okay, she exudes royalty, right? We get to the home and we start speaking, and as we speak, I realize I can't identify the energies within her because she's flipping around so rapidly. Like, she might be host to a male energy, and then mid conversation it's a female energy. Not that the switch is weird or the energy is unbalanced in how it transitions. It's just that I couldn't use one pronoun consistently throughout the whole conversation. If I started saying mkulu, which means elder, but emphasizing the male aspect, there would be times where I would say mkulu as a pronoun in referring to her because she was exuding a dominant masculine energy that was ancient. And then all of a sudden she switches and Ukoknozizwe shows up. And Koknozizwe is a feminine energy. And now when she's talking in this feminine energy, yeah, I first attempted to switch with her and use my pronouns as I read her energy, but then at some point I realized, like, nah, femo, she's switching too much. So I explained to her that, like, yo, how should I refer to you? Because I am having a hard time keeping up with the energy readings of the auras that you are allowing to inhabit you. And she said, just call me Makosi, which means the Lords. So I'm like, okay, Marcos. So we that's how the session begins with my talking to Marcos. And at the time, I had access to finances enough to sustain that conversation. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because usually when you are talking with these people from South African traditional medicine context, you'll find that they have rituals of interaction. There's a protocol that you must follow. The protocol, there's something called the enlightener. It sounds very strange when I attempt to translate it. It's called iskanyiso. It's the thing you use to bring light. So iskanyiso being the metaphor that you are bringing the thing that's going to be used to switch on the candle, that's going to be used to look into your future or to consider your reality essentially. So you are a person in darkness seeking light, and then you bring, say, a matchstick to the person who has the candle, and then you offer the matchstick, and then the person lights the candle for you, and then they use the candle to teach you how to get more light. Ideally, if I take an overview of it, that's how it's supposed to work. So that's the protocol. But due to the economics of the time not being created to sustain this particular culture, you find that people will have they will sort of the model has changed from interaction, and it's now more it's more the emphasis is more on the matches, on the thing that brings the light, than it is on the light that the healer can bring you. So whenever you meet these people, they'll sort of ask you for a fee type of thing. Picture the tarot scam readers that are prevalent throughout Facebook and TikTok. When they come to you, they will ask you for a certain amount, and then they will do a reading for you based on the amount. You find that even in the actual reality of South African traditional medicine, you find that these people are waiting to receive iskhanyiso, the slight bringer, and then they won't really interact with you much. And you find other people sort of optimize all of their skills towards being able to collect just that fee. Like, they might not be able to see the entire context that you need, but if they can't see the entire context, they'll optimize their skills such that they will at least get you sitting at the consultation table, having paid the consultation fee. At least that much will be covered. That's the state of affairs as things are occurring. So that's the context. So that's why I mentioned that I actually had the fees to keep the interaction going. But the downside is, unlike the TikTok or Instagram scammers who offer you readings through text messages, at least with them you know upfront how much you are gonna pay. But in the traditional context, you don't really know upfront how much you are gonna pay. Some people will tell you upfront. They'll be like, "Hey yo, I charge $100 just for me to look into your energy." And then other people will use the person who's referring you sometimes will also say that, no, the lady charges this much for a consultation. So even if the actual practitioner doesn't mention the fee, but the referrer could mention the fee, right? So fine. On the first day, we spend the first day just talking. She asks for 2 bottles of Black Label. I'm happy to oblige, because usually I'm used to like people who have the ancestors. People who have the ancestors usually will ask for like brandy, your Viceroy, your Clipdrift, and that's all to facilitate the channeling process. So I understand completely why a person who is a channeler would need the spirits, right? Would need something to at least let the spirits flow smoothly. So I get these 2, and then she says I can get something for myself. I'm like, oh, by all means, I get myself a young quart of stout and some milk, because I like how it tastes like umbodi. Yeah, man, it just hits very nicely. And the way so she drinks her 2, I drink mine, I indulge in some cannabis as well. And we pretty much have a young day just interacting the first few hours. We speak from like the time we met at the store until 11 p.m. that evening, right? Okay, so 11 p.m. I go home, I sleep. The next day I return. When I returned the next day, the aim was that, so the first day, because we were having an informal conversation, the entities which were possessing her without her volition. Like, she wasn't opening herself up. It was that the topics I was bringing up were so intense that entities from my history and understanding were jumping over to her and expressing themselves to me through her, regardless of the fact that she had chosen to remain conscious for most of that session. That brings part of my issues with the methods of training within certain sects of South African traditional medicine. There's a consent issue I feel like needs to be discussed. amongst traditional healers in the South African context. Some of your ancestors don't know consent. They must be taught consent in the same way that they must be taught that consulting for 1 rand no longer means the same thing it did when consulting for 1 rand, what consulting for 1 rand meant when that entity was alive. So I keep on referring to these awarenesses as entities. It's entities because I avoid using the term spirits to chase away the ones who claim to be objective and yet don't consider all the facts and all the phenomena and the range of phenomena at that. Okay, so the consent issue. From what I've observed, especially with the people whose trainings involves drinking blood towards the end, like for whether it's graduation or during the ritual, if your training involves blood, chances are you're going to have issues when it comes to consent regarding the entities, the forms of awareness that enter your body. For example, I entertain awarenesses, right? If I'm reading a book, I'm entertaining the awareness of the author. That is no different from a person who's entertaining an awareness that they are inducting from my energetic emanations by virtue of the energetic sensibilities that they have enhanced through certain techniques and modes of teaching within the South African traditional framework, right? That's to say, you can train, you can learn, make your body sensitive, but then when you read my energy, it's no different than when I'm taking a book and I'm opening the book. This memo pad of mine, if it had a quotation from a person who was deceased, this memo pad would play the role of a spirit in that sense. Do you understand? A spirit is just awareness. Ne? So I'll keep on referring to them as entities in order to preserve the awareness aspect of it. Ne? Cool. Okay. So going back again. So the first day, she had decided that she was not gonna give up control of her awareness for my benefit. But then she chose that she's gonna continue pursuing. Like, she chose that she's gonna continue. Even though she chose that she's not gonna give space to the awareness entities that needed to speak to me through her, because she's made herself a gate for such interactions. It happened nonetheless. And so she dropped some bars, some revelations on the first initial unofficial encounter. One of the things she shared was something that they usually say in these communities, at least to me. They will say you were born with a blanket to describe that when your mother pushed you out, there was still a membrane covering you. And I forgot what that membrane is called, but I know for a fact the membrane is filled with stem cells. It's a pretty awesome thing for pharmaceutical companies and research companies and practitioners of the hidden knowledge from the different schools of understanding, because there's many uses for this thing. But in the South African traditional medicine context, the actual use for the actual covering is not there, more so than to person is going to be of some significance in this reality. And then the significance is usually determined by the context within which that being exists. But at the very least, I can say it symbolizes significance, right? The blanket. And then she also told me that apparently when I was born, I was strangled by my umbilical cord. This is the second time I'm hearing this. The first time, my other friends were having a very abstract conversation. And when I say an abstract conversation, I'm saying I live in a reality where you can see the levels that people existed based on the narratives that they share amongst themselves and with other people, right? So you find that in a conversation, some people are gonna get lost and they won't even notice that they are lost, right? And then the conversation will continue. So I've been in conversations where we would start off, maybe there's like 7 of us and we were talking, and then we just keep on losing people until there's like 3 of us. And then usually I'd find that when there's like 3 of us, I can't really participate so much as I can follow the conversation. I wouldn't be able to speak at that level, but I'd certainly be able to perceive and understand at that level. So one of these times when I was perceiving at this level, my 2 friends, Tabiso and Katleho, from where I come from in Katleho in the East Rand, K1 salute. Why that for the K1? I don't know. I raise no number. You can call me Neil. 1 and 0 lata. That's the one in Ibizayo. Cause I never been inside, so I only know what the elders in the community have taught me, and they were not teaching me forbidden things. They were just sharing in the same way you say 10 cent boy. That's how I picked this thing up. But I'm not really professing that right now. It was just an in-passing thing to say, if you see me raising numbers, remember, I raise no number. You can call me Neil. Ne? Yeah, because life is the only cell I feel. That's a young throwback to one of the TikToks I made a while back. Should I plug or live surreal? It's a pretty dope track. Check it out some other time. So, yeah. How's the battery looking? Okay, we're still good. So, yes. Where was I? Ooh. Oh, yeah. Blankets. So, she shares that I was born with a blanket, and like I said, that means significance. She says I was strangled by the umbilical cord when I was born, and then that reminded me of the conversation with Katleho and Tabiso. So, Katleho and Tabiso are born from families where there are traditional healers who have embraced traditional healing, which means that their perception of reality is significantly more different than the typical child who grows up in a home that has not chosen a belief system, and the typical child who grows up in a Christian home. Because Christian homes come with a cultural sterilization that reduces the depth of experience of a black person, right? Okay. So, they are now talking at this level where they were raised by cultivators of the arts, and they can reach a level of speech that I couldn't yet reach at the time, but I could perceive into it. And I heard them discussing my case, and they were discussing why it was that I couldn't animate my awareness or my spirit in the level where they were currently having that discussion. And one of them responded, it was Ukatleho. He responded that, nah, this nigga died when he was born. And it was a bit weird. But when Makosetive then says, like, nah, my nigga, you were wrapped around by an umbilical cord, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So why that would be of significance is the fact that much trauma whilst you are still inside the womb makes it such that by the time you are pushed out, your perception of reality is a bit deeper than someone who wasn't strangled before they came out. Do you understand? If I was just born, my mom pushed and I slid out, and the only shock I saw was all of this sound and all of this sensation on my skin, then my cry will be a cry of like, okay, this is weird, right? But if I was strangled by an umbilical cord, then on top of all of the stimulus and sensations being amplified by virtue of me no longer being in amniotic fluid, then beyond the amplification, you find that I was also gasping for breath. So I'm just happy to breathe. Like, even though you're just born, you're appreciating breath with the same intensity as someone doing pranayama. Ne? So I keep on doing that, not because my ear itches, but because it keeps on blocking. But I'm just going to allow it now to block as it wills, because, man, okay. As soon as I project my voice, it just gets blocked, so it's fine. Okay, those are the details, the tiny details she had mentioned. The next day, this process where she feels into my energy to the point where she's possessed by my ancestors. Remember, ancestor just means information stored. That's it. That's an ancestor. It's information stored. The information may be stored on a piece of paper, as in the form of a book, or the information may be stored in the ether, which then... Yes, you may. Or it may be stored in the ether. And if it's stored in the ether, then it's like a book which only a select few people can read. And that, when the information is in that form, that's when people use words like spirit. But don't be dismayed by the word spirit. Spirit is no different than to say an awareness in time. The awareness in time could be on a piece of paper, or it could be floating in the being in front of you, which is me, peace be up, the being in front of you, my name, right? So you are using your sight and your hearing to perceive, right? Now, the extent to which your eyes are operating isn't necessarily the peak at which your eyes can operate, nor your hearing or any of your other senses. This can be due to diet, due to lifestyle, due to a numerous number of factors, but the fact remains that perceiving is not the highest extent or the most broad extent at which you can perceive things, right? So these people who are trained in South African traditional medicine in particular, the pathway uses empathogens. These empathogens amplify your ability to perceive, your surrounding reality, such that you can pick up very nuanced details in someone's electromagnetic field. You remember, each time your brain fires, there's an electric spark, and whenever there's electricity, there's magnetism. The electromagnetism of your very being creates an information field